Our Honorable Auditors General, Deputy Auditors General who are present, senior representatives of Supreme Audit institutions, and my dear colleagues in the AFROSAI region, good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on stakeholder engagement practices in our region. My name is Zakia and I am your moderator for this afternoon. I am responsible for capacity building in communication and stakeholder engagement in the AFROSAI-E sub-region. And this topic is of great interest to me, so I hope that you get extreme value from it as well. The webinar is convened by the Supreme Audit Institution of South Africa, the AGSA, in response to the AFROSAI OCBC resolution from earlier this year. To make our time together valuable, this webinar will cover experiences of various Supreme Audit institutions from AFROSAI, including from the sub-regions of AFROSAI-E and CREFIA. Before I begin, I request that any questions or comments that you may have must be written in the chat facility, and if it is possible, please write them in English. We will address as many of them as possible in the question and answer session towards the end of this webinar. But for any questions or comments that we miss, we will be responding in writing within the next few weeks, if possible. With that, I would like to call upon Mr. Mohammed Bastawi from the Court of Accounts of the Kingdom of Morocco to officially welcome you and open this session. Mr. Mohammed Bastawi.
Merci beaucoup, chère Madame Zakia Farid, pour cette présentation. Je me présente pour ceux et celles qui ne me connaissent pas. Je suis Mohammed Bastawi. Je suis un directeur d'audit à la Cour des comptes. J'étais président de chambre pendant plus de 13 ans ici à la Cour des comptes. J'ai travaillé un peu au ministère des Finances et à la Cour des comptes. Et actuellement, je suis chargé d'un certain nombre de dossiers au sein de la Cour des comptes, notamment le dossier AFROSAI et toutes les composantes qui vont avec. Actuellement aussi, je préside par intérim notre comité ou bien notre commission, la commission de renforcement des capacités organisationnelles. En attendant que le comité directeur en décidera dans la session qui aura lieu lundi prochain à Tripoli. Et cette action qui est prise en charge par l'auditeur général de l'Afrique du Sud a été inscrite dans le plan d'action de notre commission. C'était la commission de renforcement des capacités organisationnelles qui a été décidée, je pense, à Douala en 2023. Et nous avons acté ça dans la réunion qui a eu lieu à Yaoundé en février 2024 et en début de cette année. Vous savez que cette année, nous avons tenu une réunion très importante à Yaoundé en février 2024, dans laquelle nous avons, avec la participation de toutes les composantes de la commission, réorganisé le plan d'action, réorganisé les activités, et comme ça, nous avions fixé 5 activités qui devraient être réalisées pendant cette année par les ISC membres de la commission. Cette activité, c'est la deuxième après la première qui a été réalisée par la Cour des comptes du Maroc en avril 2024 sur la formation sur le SAI-PMF. Et cette activité qui est prise en charge, je rappelle, cette activité qui est prise en charge par l'auditeur général de l'Afrique du Sud qui va travailler sur la mobilisation et l'engagement des parties prenantes au sein des CSC. C'est une activité très importante, donc qui va jalonner un peu les travaux de notre commission. Il était, j'allais dire, prévu à ce que Madame le Premier Président assiste en personne à cette réunion, mais elle est actuellement en déplacement. Donc, on a tenu à ce qu'elle fasse un speech d'introduction, un discours d'introduction, j'allais dire, de cette réunion, qui a été enregistré, mais il est un peu long. Je ne sais pas si nos collègues de l'Afrique, de l'AGSA, de l'auditeur général, ont pu réduire j'allais dire, cette vidéo, ce recording. Voilà, donc j'allais dire, en guise d'introduction. Sur le menu, sur l'ordre du jour de cette réunion, donc nous aurons Madame Nantenine Magasuba de la Cour des comptes de Guinée, qui va nous travailler un peu sur le retour sur un questionnaire qui a été fait sur les stakeholders, sur les parties prenantes. Donc, on va essayer de nous présenter les résultats de cette enquête auprès des parties prenantes. Qu'est-ce qu'ils attendent de nous, ISC, et qu'est-ce que nous attendons, nous, ISC, des parties prenantes. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, les ISC, comme vous le savez, qu'on va traiter certainement dans la journée, ne peuvent plus continuer à travailler, j'allais dire, à huis clos, mais elles doivent s'offrir davantage sur toutes les parties prenantes, gouvernement, parlement, société civile, citoyens, partis audités, et même en interne, même vis-à-vis des auditeurs, des contrôleurs internes. Après, il y aura M. Siad Nassaki, qui est senior manager à l'Institut supérieur à la SAI de South Africa, de l'Afrique du Sud, qui va un peu nous présenter les principes du management pour l'engagement des parties prenantes. Donc, c'est ça l'objet. Et après, il y aura Madame Aïcha Belhassan de la Cour des comptes, qui est présidente de section à la Cour des comptes de Tunisie. Bonjour, Madame. Donc, qui va un peu nous entretenir sur l'engagement des parties prenantes dans les ISC à caractère juridictionnel, qui est spécifique de certaines ISC en Afrique, beaucoup, en Afrique francophone surtout, et dans le Maghreb. Maroc, Mauritanie, Algérie, Tunisie. Donc, elle va peu nous parler de ces spécificités. Après, nous allons faire un petit break, j'allais dire soft, c'est rapide. Et après, nous reprendrons avec Madame Nathalie Nguema du Gabon, qui va un peu nous entretenir sur l'expérience des CREFIAF, le AFROSAI French, sur la partie de mobilisation des parties prenantes. Et après, nous aurons vers 15h, 15h30, une discussion ouverte par tous les participants. Et après, nous aurons à clôturer vers 15h30, 15h35. Voilà le menu de la journée. Je vous remercie beaucoup, tout un chacun parmi vous, d'être ici présent dans cette journée. Je sais que certains parmi vous vont voyager en Libye dans les jours qui viennent, mais il fallait absolument faire cette activité parce qu'elle était programmée. Il fallait le faire parce que nous aurons un rapport à présenter devant le comité directeur la semaine prochaine et devant l'Assemblée générale aussi sur les travaux de cette commission. Merci à vous tous. Je rends la parole à Madame Zakiya Ferry. Merci.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bastawi. I would like to play the video. We have shortened it a little bit. So we will have a message from the first president of the Court of Audits from the Kingdom of Morocco. So Romain, if you can play that video for us, please.
Chers membres de la Commission de renforcement des capacités organisationnelles de l'AFROSAI, bonjour. C'est vraiment avec un grand plaisir que j'interviens dans ce webinaire destiné aux pratiques de mobilisation des parties prenantes par les ISC d'Afrique. En ma qualité de président par intérim de cette importante commission, je tiens à vous remercier tous, vous membres de cette commission, pour votre implication. Je remercie particulièrement Madame l'auditeur général de l'Afrique du Sud pour son engagement à prendre en charge cette action combien d'importance pour nous tous. Je souhaiterais tout d'abord rappeler que l'élaboration des stratégies d'implication des parties prenantes est une initiative lancée en novembre 2010 par l'AFROSAI à l'occasion de son 20e congrès tenu à Johannesburg. Dans ses résolutions, dites accords de Johannesburg, l'AFROSAI avait souligné l'importance de l'implication des parties prenantes dans les travaux de nos IIC. L'IDI a ensuite, en 2017, publié un guide destiné aux ISC sur la mobilisation des parties prenantes et a lancé un programme dans toutes les régions de l'AFROSAI visant à aider les ISC à développer et à mettre en œuvre des stratégies d'engagement avec leurs parties prenantes externes, notamment le Parlement, la société civile, bien sûr les audités, et l'essentiel, ce sont les citoyens. Ceci témoigne de la prise de conscience par les décideurs de notre prestigieuse communauté de l'importance du rôle des stakeholders, aussi bien internes qu'externes. Mesdames et messieurs, membres de la Commission, les relations avec des ISC avec les parties prenantes sont à double sens. Elles sont influencées d'une part par la prédisposition des ISC à s'ouvrir sur leur environnement, par la capacité de nos ressources humaines à prendre en charge cette responsabilité, et d'autre part, par la volonté et la capacité des parties prenantes à s'engager de manière responsable, de manière continue envers les ISC. C'est pas parce qu'il y a eu un changement de la majorité ou au sein du Parlement qu'on va perdre ce qu'on a capitalisé sur ce genre de relations. C'est cet engagement mutuel qui peut conduire à un plus grand impact des missions d'audit et permet aux ISC d'innover, de faire mieux et de réaliser des travaux de qualité. C'est ce qui explique que de nos jours, plusieurs ISC ont érigé l'engagement des parties prenantes comme une priorité de premier rang. D'autres ISC y vont dans la progressivité, alors que d'autres, pour des raisons liées à leur positionnement institutionnel ou à la volonté politique du pays, d'autres s'abstiennent encore. Les ISC ouvertes sur leur environnement ont plus de chances d'être soutenues via ce dialogue avec les parties prenantes, soutenues dans leur processus d'audit, surtout dans le sens de la consolidation de leur positionnement vers une indépendance plus déclarée par leur crédibilité exemplaire due surtout à l'impact de leurs travaux sur le terrain, à l'impact senti par le citoyen, senti par l'investisseur au vu de l'amélioration du cadre de vie et du cadre de l'investissement. Chers membres de la Commission, je souhaiterais suggérer quelques recommandations à notre honorable Commission. Tout d'abord, sensibiliser les ISC membres de l'AFROSAI au bienfait de la mobilisation des parties prenantes en tant que priorité stratégique et élaborer des sessions de formation au profit du top management des ISC. Accompagner nos ISC africaines à se positionner dans le processus d'ouverture sur les parties prenantes en les classant selon leur niveau d'évolution dont j'en ai parlé tout à l'heure, celles avancées et expérimentées dans ce processus, celles en cours de son institution et celles n'y ont pas encore entamé cette dynamique. Élaborer un programme de renforcement des capacités des ressources humaines de nos ISC membres, organiser cette formation ou ce programme méritera d'être organisé en un tronc commun et en ateliers dédiés, spécialisés. Autre suggestion, assister nos ISC intéressés à développer des stratégies de communication propres et à élaborer des plans d'action pour l'ouverture sur les parties prenantes. S'ouvrir davantage sur les expériences réussies en la matière et mutualiser ces expériences, tout en s'inspirant du benchmark des bonnes pratiques internationales en la matière. Étant toujours engagé à soutenir le développement des ISC sœurs, notre cher continent africain, la Cour des comptes du Royaume du Maroc reste toujours disposée à partager son expérience dans le cadre de notre communauté AFROSAI et de ses démembrements. Je vous souhaite un excellent échange et je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mohammed Bastawi, and we appreciate the message from Madam Chair. We will be sending a link to the full video recording from the chair of the AFROSAI OCBC to all participants and attendees today. And we will also attach a written version of it for you. So that you don't miss out on the absolutely valuable messages she had in her speech. But the message from the chair was quite clear that the benefits of strategically engaging stakeholders enhances the audit impact for the benefit of the citizens of our respective countries. And that is something we have to bear in mind as we go further. Now, we did say that this webinar was triggered by a resolution, by a survey done by the SAI of Guinea, Conakry. Guinea-Conakry, that's it.
Yes.
And to tell us more about the survey and give us feedback and insights into why we're looking at stakeholder engagement so closely, I would like to invite Ms. Nantanin Magasuba from the Court of the Republic of Guinea, Court of Audit of the Republic of Guinea. Ms. Magasuba?
Okay. Merci, Madame Zakia. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je suis Madame Nantene Magasuba, magistrate conseillère maître à la Cour des comptes de Guinée. Je suis membre de la commission technique de l'AFROSAI de renforcement des capacités organisationnelles. J'ai l'honneur de vous présenter les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes. Si vous me permettez, je vais partager mon écran. Voilà. J'ai l'honneur de vous présenter les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes dans la région AFROSAI. Et pour cela, voici mon plan de présentation. Nous avons l'introduction, l'organisation de l'AFROSAI que je vais rappeler, sa composition et les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes avec l'ARABOSAI, les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes avec l'AFROSAI-E, les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes avec le CREFIAF. Je vais parler aussi des conséquences du non-engagement des parties prenantes avant de tirer une conclusion. L'AFROSAI, qui est une institution africaine d'organisation, une organisation africaine plutôt des institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques. Cette organisation régionale regroupe les institutions supérieures de contrôle des pays africains. Elle vise à promouvoir et développer l'échange d'idées et d'expériences entre les ISC des États africains dans le domaine du contrôle des finances publiques. Cette organisation a été fondée le 30 novembre 1976 à Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. La composition de l'AFROSAI. L'AFROSAI est composée de plusieurs groupes régionaux, chacun regroupant des pays africains selon leur langue officielle. Par exemple, l'ARABOSAI, qui regroupe les pays parlant la langue arabe, comprend 22 pays membres. L'AFROSAI-E aussi, qui regroupe les pays d'expression anglaise, comprend 26 pays anglophones. Et le CREFIAF, qui est le Conseil régional de formation des institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques d'Afrique francophone subsaharienne, comprend 22 pays francophones. Ces groupes régionaux permettent une coopération plus étroite et des échanges d'expériences entre les institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques des pays membres. En ce qui concerne l'organisation de l'AFROSAI, elle est structurée en plusieurs organes principaux. Premièrement, nous avons l'Assemblée générale, qui est l'organe suprême de l'AFROSAI, composé de tous les pays membres, qui se réunit régulièrement pour définir les grandes orientations et les politiques de l'organisation. Deuxièmement, nous avons le comité directeur, qui est chargé de la mise en œuvre des décisions de l'Assemblée générale et de la gestion courante de l'organisation. Nous avons aussi le secrétariat qui assure le soutien administratif et logistique nécessaire au fonctionnement de l'AFROSAI. En ce qui concerne maintenant les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes avec l'AFROSAI, l'AFROSAI, comme je l'ai dit, qui est l'organisation africaine qui regroupe les pays arabes, met en œuvre plusieurs pratiques pour l'engagement efficace des parties prenantes. Voici quelques-unes des principales pratiques. Ils ont des consultations et des dialogues réguliers. L'AFROSAI organise des consultations et des dialogues réguliers avec ses membres et autres parties prenantes pour discuter des enjeux et des priorités. Ces réunions permettent de recueillir des avis et de renforcer la collaboration. Deuxièmement, nous avons la transparence et la communication. La communication transparente est essentielle. L'AFROSAI publie des rapports et des mises à jour régulières sur des activités et ses résultats, permettant ainsi aux parties prenantes de suivre les progrès et de fournir des retours. Troisièmement, nous avons le renforcement des capacités. L'AFROSAI met en place des programmes de formation et de développement pour renforcer les compétences des auditeurs et des parties prenantes. Cela inclut des formations sur les normes internationales et les meilleures pratiques en matière d'audit. Quatrièmement, nous avons des partenariats stratégiques aussi. L'AFROSAI collabore avec d'autres organisations régionales et internationales pour partager des ressources, et des connaissances. Ces partenariats permettent de renforcer les capacités institutionnelles et de promouvoir des pratiques d'audit efficaces. Cinquièmement, nous avons l'évaluation et l'amélioration continue. L'AFROSAI évalue régulièrement ses pratiques et ses processus pour identifier les domaines à améliorer. Cela inclut des évaluations de conformité aux normes ISAI. Ces pratiques montrent l'engagement de l'AFROSAI à promouvoir la bonne gouvernance et à renforcer les institutions de contrôle des finances publiques dans la région. Et maintenant, je vais aborder aussi l'engagement des parties prenantes avec l'AFROSAI-E, c'est-à-dire l'Organisation des institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques d'Afrique anglophone. L'AFROSAI-E met en œuvre plusieurs pratiques pour engager efficacement les parties prenantes. Voici aussi quelques exemples. Nous avons la consultation et le dialogue régulier. L'AFROSAI-E organise des consultations et des dialogues réguliers avec ses membres et autres parties prenantes pour discuter des enjeux et des priorités. Par exemple, lors de l'examen stratégique de 2022, plus de 110 délégués de 26 pays membres ont participé à des discussions sur la responsabilité et la lutte contre la corruption. Nous avons aussi, au second point, la transparence et la communication. La communication transparente est essentielle. L'AFROSAI-E publie des rapports et des mises à jour régulières sur les activités et ses résultats, permettant ainsi aux parties prenantes de suivre les progrès et de fournir des retours. Au troisième point, nous avons le renforcement des capacités. L'AFROSAI-E met en place des programmes de formation et de développement pour renforcer les capacités des auditeurs et autres parties prenantes. Cela inclut des formations et des normes internationales et les meilleures pratiques en matière d'audit. Au quatrième point aussi, il y a le partenariat stratégique. Ils font des partenariats stratégiques. L'AFROSAI-E collabore avec d'autres organisations régionales et internationales pour partager des ressources et des connaissances. Ces partenariats permettent de renforcer les capacités institutionnelles et de promouvoir des pratiques d'audit efficaces. Au second point, nous avons l'évaluation et l'amélioration continue. L'AFROSAI évalue régulièrement ses pratiques et ses processus pour identifier les domaines à améliorer. Cela inclut des évaluations de conformité aux normes ISAI. Ces pratiques montrent l'engagement de l'AFROSAI-E à promouvoir la bonne gouvernance et à renforcer les institutions de contrôle des finances publiques dans la région. Nous avons aussi les pratiques d'engagement des parties prenantes au sein du CREFIAF. Le CREFIAF, qui est le Conseil régional de formation des institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques d'Afrique francophone subsaharienne, met en œuvre plusieurs pratiques pour engager efficacement les parties prenantes. Voici quelques-unes des principales pratiques. Premièrement, nous avons la consultation et des dialogues réguliers. Le CREFIAF organise des consultations régulières avec les parties prenantes pour discuter des enjeux et des priorités. Cela inclut des réunions, des ateliers et des forums pour échanger des idées et des meilleures pratiques. Au second point, nous avons la transparence et la communication. La communication transparente est essentielle. Le CREFIAF publie des rapports et des mises à jour régulières sur ses activités et ses résultats, permettant ainsi aux parties prenantes de suivre les progrès et de fournir des retours. Au troisième point, nous avons le renforcement des capacités. Le CREFIAF met en place des programmes de formation et de développement pour renforcer les compétences des auditeurs et des autres parties prenantes. Cela inclut des formations sur les normes internationales et les meilleures pratiques en matière d'audit. Au quatrième point, nous avons des partenariats stratégiques. Le CREFIAF collabore avec autres organisations régionales et internationales pour partager les ressources et des connaissances. Ces partenariats permettent de renforcer les capacités institutionnelles et de promouvoir les pratiques d'audit efficaces. Et au dernier point, nous avons l'évaluation et l'amélioration continue. Le CREFIAF évalue régulièrement ses pratiques et ses processus pour identifier les domaines à améliorer. Cela inclut les évaluations de conformité aux normes ISAI. Ces pratiques montrent l'engagement du CREFIAF à promouvoir la bonne gouvernance et à renforcer les institutions de contrôle des finances publiques dans la région. Et je vais me permettre aussi de parler des conséquences du non-engagement des parties prenantes. Le non-engagement des parties prenantes avec les institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques peut avoir plusieurs conséquences négatives, à savoir le manque de transparence. Sans la participation active des parties prenantes, il devient difficile de garantir la transparence dans la gestion des finances publiques. Cela peut mener à des pratiques de corruption et de mauvaise gestion. On a aussi un niveau faible de responsabilisation. Les institutions de contrôle dépendent de la coopération des parties prenantes pour assurer une gestion financière responsable. Leur absence peut réduire la responsabilisation des gestionnaires publics. L'inefficacité des audits. Des audits réalisés par les institutions supérieures de contrôle peuvent perdre en efficacité sans l'engagement des parties prenantes, car les recommandations peuvent ne pas être mises en œuvre correctement. Il y a aussi une perte de confiance publique. Le manque d'engagement peut éroder la confiance des citoyens dans les institutions publiques, ce qui est essentiel pour une gouvernance efficace et la légitimité des actions gouvernementales. Il y a aussi un risque accru de fraude et de corruption. L'absence de surveillance et de contrôle rigoureux peut créer un environnement propice à la fraude et à la corruption, permettant ainsi l'intégrité des finances publiques. Ça va compromettre l'intégrité plutôt des finances publiques. Et en bref, Il est important de renforcer la collaboration entre les institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques et les parties prenantes, en promouvant la transparence, la responsabilisation et l'efficacité des audits. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Ms. Magasuba. This was very insightful, and I think we need to commend Saigini Konakari for conducting the survey and bringing forward all of the insights to us. Stakeholder engagement does happen in the region, clearly, but the question is, are we strategic about it? And I think for that, I know within our region as well, we are focusing on impactful stakeholder relationships, which require then for us to be strategic, which means we need to have strategies and plans in place. And I think the results would be very much different once we start doing this kind of strategic stakeholder engagement and putting plans and strategies in place. So we really thank you, Ms. Magasuba. It was very insightful. And I think now the next step is for us to learn how strategic stakeholder engagement takes place. And for that, I'd like to bring on Mr. Sianda Saki, who is a senior manager at AFROSAI South Africa. Sianda?
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm not sure if I'm visible.
Yes, you are. We can see you clearly.
Yes. Good afternoon, Program Director. Good afternoon to the colleagues. Also want to thank Mr. Bastiwa for the opening remarks, and also good afternoon to my fellow panelists. I think from the conversation we just had now with Ms. Magasuba, it's clear then that we can all agree that there's a very important role that stakeholder management plays in the life of a Supreme Audit institution. I think at least from the two conversations we've had now, surely we can be sure of that. Program Director, my presentation is mostly around the theory, in fact, the key principles around stakeholder management. My other colleagues will give us more practical examples later. I'm trying, by all means, not to give a South African flavor, Program Director, but to give more the general principles that all the SAIs must be able to adhere to. I think at first, as I've said, one of the key things that we've observed is that it's important to have stakeholder management practices in the SAIs, because that helps the SAIs to be able to know exactly who are their stakeholders. So through my presentation, as you will see, colleagues, I'll take you through the most important aspects of the key principles. I think the first principle that I would like us to talk about is a principle around identifying stakeholders. SAIs in different regions have got different stakeholders. I think what is important for SAI under the first principle of identification is to make sure that each SAI maybe go through a process of what I call is a brainstorming, where the SAI sits around and identify who are its key stakeholders, who are the group of people that are important to the life of a SAI, who are the organizations the SAI work with. And then throughout the process of consultation, of identifying, it's important also to make it a point that the SAI, after that identification process, is able to consult and engage various people, to make it a point that it has a comprehensive list of all its stakeholders. So that's the very first important principle in the steps around stakeholder management. The second one, again, colleagues, which is quite important, is about categorizing the stakeholders. Now that SI knows who are its stakeholders and has identified them, it's important then for the SI to have a sense of, in the many stakeholders that it has, is that it has to categorize them in terms of the importance, in terms of the power grid. There's something that I call a power grid, where you look at the importance of the stakeholders, and you have to make a decision as to, given the nature of each of the stakeholders, how do you rank them? Do you consider them to be important? Do you consider them to be keeping informed on certain issues? Or do you want to make it a point that it's a stakeholder that you stay close to? So I think one of the key important aspects around the categorization as well is about the SAI has to decide as well in the categories of stakeholders that it has as to how does it influence them in order for them to play a role in the work of the SAI? And how does it keep them interested in some cases in the work that the SAI has? And what kind of impact also that the SAI wants to achieve in the stakeholders that it has categorized? And lastly, it has to determine what is the nature of the agency. So these are the kind of things that the SAI has to look into in terms of the work that it does around the stakeholders. And then on step number 3, you can go back to that slide again. You can go back. On step number 3, it's important also to look at what we call the analyzation of stakeholders. You need to analyze, therefore, in terms of with the stakeholders that you have to think about what are the needs of each of the stakeholders and how does the SAI then meet those stakeholders' needs. So I think it's important then to look into that step as well and decide as to how do you form a relationship with the stakeholders as you analyze them. And also you need to determine under step 3 as well as to what are the engagement strategies you need to formulate. Because remember, stakeholders have got a different way in which they prefer to be worked with. So as you engage them, you need to decide, is this the right way of engaging them or not? And then on the 4th step there, it's about also looking at the prioritizing the stakeholders. Here we're talking about the importance of who is important around the stakeholder groups. Do you think your media is important more than your parliament, your legislature? Or do you think the media is important more than the civil society? So the step of prioritizing them gives you those kind of results. We can move to the next one. I think what also becomes quite important is that it's important also in the whole process of stakeholder, what we call stakeholder profiling. I think here in profiling, it's really about taking a bit of time to look at the stakeholders closely in terms of what they need and what is important for them and what is not important for them. So I suspect then in this particular step, it's important then the mapping process gives you a chance to know how do you rate the relationships with the stakeholders that you've looked at, so that you do not formulate relationships without the context of what is important to that stakeholder group. So the process of profiling gives you a sense of what is the stakeholder like, what is the nature of the relationship you want to have with them, and how do you want to work with them. If you can move to the next one. I think here, colleagues, this is the essence of this particular task that was given to us. It's about how do we help the SAIs to develop stakeholder engagement plans. I think there are 7 or 8 bullet points here, which I'll just run through quickly because they are very easy to follow. The first thing is to make sure that when you develop a stakeholder plan, 1, you categorize your stakeholders in terms of the groups. Are they constitutional stakeholders that you have to engage? Are the constitutionals, are they stakeholders that you think are important to the business of the SAI? Part of the plan as well, you need to go through an exercise of naming the stakeholders so that you don't forget who they are. But thirdly, you need to make a decision about what kind of resources you want to allocate to each of the stakeholders that you want to have. But most importantly as well, you need to write down the kind of the impact that you want to have, because as you engage the stakeholders, you need to know exactly what you want to get out of the engagement. And then you also need to go through a process of checking what is their needs so that the relationship is not based on what the SAI wants, but is also based on what the stakeholders are looking for, so that it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. But then after you look at the stakeholder needs, you have to find a way of plotting and profiling them. I've spoken to this one. But also you need to check in your plan, what are the key milestones, so that as you are executing, you have a sense of what are the critical areas you want to get to. But lastly, the plan must also determine the frequency of engagements. How many times do you want to engage a certain stakeholder and for what reason? And then lastly, you can look at the issues around the objectives of the engagement, because you don't want to just engage for the sake of engaging. You also want to make it a point that you are clear as to why you engage. Can we move to the next one, please? What is important as well, as I've said, broadly, the plan should cover what I call pre-planning, which is before you actually engage, you must be able to think about what is it that you want to look into. And then part of the pre-planning phase in the plan is that you need to look at what you need to do internally within the groups, within the SAI. You also have to look at the kind of documentation you need to have, prepared before you engage the stakeholders. And then during the engagement, then with the stakeholders, you need to look into 5 important things as well. One is you need to make it a point that you allocate sufficient time for each of the stakeholder groups you want to meet with. But also you have to allow the stakeholders adequate time as well to engage you, because there's a lot of feedback that comes from the stakeholders during the engagement process. But based on whatever engagements you have or questions you have, you must always be willing as a side to offer your own assistance. We've noted in the case of South Africa mostly where, especially with the media, where there's quite a lot of misunderstanding about what some of the audit terminology we use. So in that engagement with the media, for example, we must always be willing to come back and offer them clarity in whatever things that they are looking for. And then lastly, in stakeholders where there are commitments required, we must be able to confirm if there's certain commitments that we need to make with them and be able to follow up and honor those particular commitments. Next slide, please. I think also as part of the engagement, there are other important things as well, which are quite important now during the engagements. We spoke about pre-planning, and then we are now talking about what happens in the actual engagement. As I've said earlier on, it's important to make sure that you allocate sufficient time for the engagements so that you do not engage for the sake of engaging, but also to allow the stakeholders adequate time as well, for them to plan for the engagement. I've spoken already about being able to offer assistance and capturing commitments. But I think lastly, there's a very important aspect as well, which the SAIs need to look into, the development of a proper management information system. Now, this is a system where a SAI can be able to deposit all the engagements that have taken place so that it is in a position to go back and check how far the commitments have been made. In most instances, when you don't have such a management information system, it always raises a risk to the side that you might forget the conversation that would have been held. Remember, some conversations would have been had about 6 months to a year ago. So that management information system helps you to be able to recover and know exactly what the commitments were and what was the nature of the conversation. Next one, please. And then second, lastly, colleagues, the other thing which is quite important as well is that in some cases, it's important as well to make sure that you record all the experiences that the SAI would have had with the stakeholder engagements, because the experiences that we have with different stakeholders differ. So it is important then to make it a point that there's a way in which we are recording the experiences. You have to look into how do we monitor and evaluate the conversations we've had in the past. We need to be able also to look at the effectiveness of how the plan was implemented. But also we need to find a way to make it a point that the system that we've developed that records the conversations and the commitments made is quite active in helping us to relook into how the conversations took place. But most importantly, colleagues, it is to make it a point that there's a dedicated unit that look into how these conversations would have been undertaken. Last slide, please. Lastly, colleagues, the important thing as well is that as you keep on executing the plan year in, year out, it is important that you keep making it a point that you check for feedback, because I assume that you would normally have a 1-year plan of engagement with the stakeholders, but you need to go back again to check whether in the following year now, when you have to revise the plan, whether there's been any changes in the environment. You need to go back again when you revise the plan and check whether there's been key stakeholders that are still available, because sometimes you would have engaged one stakeholder this year and that stakeholder is no longer your priority the following year. But you also have to keep on revising whether there's been impact in the previous engagements. And then some cases there would have been changes in government, or there have been changes in the stakeholder environment. So it's important then you have to create this feedback loop every year to revise the plan as you move along. Colleagues, I would like to end it there. I thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sianda. Colleagues, I think it's very valuable to see the process of how stakeholder engagement can be planned. And I am fond of saying in our region that we should not take the difficulty of monitoring and evaluating something as soft as stakeholder engagement as a reason to not try to keep a record of the engagements you have and do a check a year, 2 years later, what has changed since you've engaged with that particular stakeholder. Again, thank you very much, Sianda, for that insightful presentation. So we've heard from a side that follows the Westminster style. So the next would be to look at the courts of audit and how they conduct their stakeholder engagement. And for that, I would like to welcome Ms. Aisha Ben-Belhassan, who is the president of section in the Court of Accounts of Tunisia, and also a member of the Forum for Intersite Professional Pronouncements, which we know as FIP. And she'll be talking about stakeholder engagement in the context of SAIs with jurisdictional responsibilities. Ms. Aisha Ben-Belhassan, welcome. I see you're trying to get your presentation up.
Can we try sharing? Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to be part of this important event about stakeholder engagement in the region of the AFROSAI. And I will share with you today some insights about the stakeholder engagement in the context of SAIs with jurisdictional responsibilities. As you know, jurisdictional SAIs are a part of the IntoSai community, and they are indeed representing 30% of this community. They have some particularities related to the functioning and the mandate of the SAI, but they have also a lot of similarities of the other SAIs. So the main question that I had to answer to is how could jurisdictional SAIs demonstrate ongoing relevance to the main stakeholders of jurisdictional SAIs? And as you know, the mandate of the jurisdictional SAI is defined by the law. And the fact of defining the mandate of the SAI by the constitution of the country and the national legal framework gives us a lot of messages about this jurisdictional competency, because we have a large stakeholders defined by this law, defining at the same time the mandate of the SAI, but also the liability regime. And some of the expectations also of these stakeholders are defined by the law, but also by the practice as presented by the survey by my colleague in the first presentation. I have to say that the process of stakeholder engagement depends also to the jurisdictional functions of the SAI, and we cannot engage stakeholders in all the process. A part of the process is confidential or secret, and other part of the process is open to the publicity and also to the media and CSOs. So I will be presenting, first of all, introductory remarks to define the jurisdictional size and their functioning, and then I will present who are the jurisdictional size stakeholders, what are the particularity of this process of engaging stakeholders of jurisdictional size, what are their expectations also. We have a part of them are already stakeholders of all the size, but they present different profile for the jurisdictional competency and for these expectations. What type of stakeholders engagement could we have in a jurisdictional SAI, and to conclude with some recommendations or some results. So as I have already said, the jurisdictional competency of the SAI is defined by the constitution of the country, by the foundation law of the SAI, and this is defining the mandate of the SAI, but also the actors and the stakeholders dealing with the SAI in the jurisdictional activity. We have also key definition in the legal framework of the SAI and the mandate, but other also coming from the legal basis of the responsibility regime, and it depends on the national context. But I'm not representing here only national context. I will present or try to present a feedback from the international community of the INTOSAI, because I'm a member of the FIP, so I have a little feedback coming from the INTOSAI community. As you know, my colleagues, the model of jurisdictional SAI is recognized by the INTOSAI as one of the organizations that can carry out not only all the types of audit, and I mean here financial audit, compliance audit, and performance audit, but has to perform, in addition to this, some jurisdictional activity, and these SAIs have really the power to rule on the liability of the persons accountable by law in case of irregularities or mismanagement. But it's not the only case of reference to the jurisdictional SAI as an output of the audit process, but also it can be referred by a third party, and I will define what is the profile of the third party. The aim of the jurisdictional activity of the SAI is the protection of the proper functioning of public management, as well as the interest of the audited entity, and furthermore of public authorities and citizens. And we find here some profiles of the stakeholders defined by the INTOSAI P50, but also by the Lima Declaration, the Mexico Declaration, and the other standards or professional pronouncement in the IFBP. So Lima Declaration is requiring that the role of the SAI is to identify the individual responsibility and provides the post-audit responsibility for the compensation of losses founded by the result of the audit. But also the Mexico Declaration defines the possibility of enforcement of sanction by the SAI when such power is part of the mandate of the SAI. And return here to the legal framework of the country and the national legal framework defining the mandate of the SAI. We have also the INTOSAI core principles P12 and P50 defining the mission of the jurisdictional SAI. We find also the SI 100 and the SI 130. But the particularity here for the jurisdictional SAI is that we find that the international treaties and the conventions applicable to justice, and I mean here the United Nations Principle of the Independence of Judiciary and the Bangalore Principles, are also in application in the case of the jurisdictional SAI, because they are defining the jurisdictional activity of the Supreme Audit Institution as a model of a court, for example, or as a part of the jurisdictional power, such the case in many countries in the INTOSAI community. So for the definition of the profile of jurisdictional SAI stakeholder, we have to define, first of all, who are the persons accountable by law, because they have some expectations and they have to provide also the process of the stakeholder engagement by some inputs in some moments of this process. They are the officials in charge of public fund management, such as, for example, the managers of public funds and the like, public accountants, elected officials, any individual interfering with public management without having the legal authority to do so. But what is the responsibility regime? The question here is what and how. The responsibility regime is the fact that the SAI could engage the personal liability and sanction the person who are accountable in case of irregularities in the management or of losses caused by these irregularities or mismanagement. And you can find here the input coming from the audit process by the SAI itself, but also by other stakeholders that I will define later. For the question, what is the aim of the jurisdictional activity? Why, the question why, is to compensate the losses suffered by a public entity and to sanction the personal liability, either financial or disciplinary, of individuals found guilty. We have here some key messages coming from the last Global SAI Stock-Taking Report of 2023 of the AFROSAI, prepared by the IDI. And we emphasize here that the need for jurisdictional SAIs to apply risk analysis to make sure that their control is not only regular but also reactive and relevant according to emerging risks in the management of certain accounts. And we are talking here about emerging risk and special needs or special expectations from the actors of the accountability ecosystem. When reflecting about how to answer to the main question, I find that some of the stakeholders are already traditional stakeholders of the SAI, whatever the mission or the competency of the SAI. But other stakeholders are coming from the expectation of particular competency of the SAI, which is the jurisdictional activity or the jurisdictional competency. And I find that some stakeholders are acting in the jurisdictional process, but others are reacting to this jurisdictional process. And that's how I try to manage the presentation of those stakeholders. For the stakeholders acting in the jurisdictional process, we find the same profiles acting to all the SAIs in the AFROSAI community, but with different expectations and different profile. And I mean here, for example, a third party, which is a public entity or citizen or civil society organization. They are acting in the jurisdictional process by presenting, for example, denunciation and also complaints about the irregularities could be referred to the SAI. And also we can find here the executive power referring to the SAI about the mismanagement in the government or in some public entities. We find also specialized agencies and watchdog as main actors of the accountability ecosystem, but giving here for the SAI some denunciation and also complaints about irregularities in public management. They have different expectation and also different process of interacting with the jurisdictional process of the SAI. But we find also some other new profiles for the SAI, such as, for example, the lawyers interfering in the principle of fair trial, because every person accountable by law has the right to be defended in the jurisdictional process. They are also acting as the explanation of the procedures in the court, and they contribute also to the jurisdictional process during the trial. We can find also other legal professions, like, for example, the legal experts intervening by inquiry, for example, by the side, by the court, during the prosecution, during the investigation and hearing sessions. We can find also the High Judicial Council, which is a structure who has the power to nominate judges and to manage the career path of judges. And they are responsible for the independence and non-removability, neutrality of the judicial structure that will judge later the persons accountable by law. So we can find other profile of stakeholders reacting to the jurisdictional process. And we can here recognize the parliament, legislative, we find also executive branch, we find also citizens, civil society organization, media, etc. They are all of them the traditional stakeholders of the SAI, but different expectations and different reaction to the jurisdictional process. Parliament is reacting to the jurisdictional process because the result of this jurisdictional process is, for example, the report about the control of the budget execution during the budget closure and the vote of the new budget in the parliament. The jurisdictional side present often the report about the budget execution, and these are some particularities about the expectations of the parliament. We have also for the executive branch, the Ministry of Finance as the main stakeholder of the jurisdictional side. It's about the budget closure exercise, but also because it's a hierarchy competence for the public accountants, because all the accounts are should be examined within a reasonable time period with the SAI, and also the result of the judgment coming from the jurisdictional process is notified to the executive branch because it's related to the career of the public manager. We can find also the citizens, the civil society organization, and the media with different expectations about the jurisdictional competency. It's related more to the results of the liability regime and also the effectiveness of the jurisdictional side, and it's related to the whole schema of the accountability ecosystem. The jurisdictional side can refer also the result or part of the result of its jurisdictional process to other judicial branches when, for example, we find criminal facts or criminal evidence, we refer them to the criminal branch, such as, for example, judicial pole of anti-corruption in many national experiences. And we have here special challenge with the principle of accumulation of sanctions. And the question is answered differently by the legal framework for of the national countries. Some of them are recognized that we can have at the same time disciplinary proceedings and administrative proceedings, and at the same time criminal proceedings. Some other experiences in other countries don't recognize this accumulation of sanctions. The second part of my presentation will deal with the demonstrating ongoing relevance to citizens, parliament, and other stakeholders by the jurisdictional side. And it will be presented through the principles of the AFROSAI P12, AFROSAI P50, but also based on the principles of the international standard related to the justice. And we have the first engagement, and the first main engagement for the jurisdictional side is to be in compliance with the fair trial engagement. And this fair trial engagement comes, in fact, from the international conventions and treaties related to justice, but it was also recognized by the AFROSAI P50 in many principles in this principle of the AFROSAI pronouncements. We have here many moments of the engagement process, and in every moment of the engagement process, we have particular thing to do by the site to engage more the stakeholders of the jurisdictional process. We have this engagement of giving the right to trial within reasonable time for the stakeholders. Also, some rights during the interrogation, like, for example, the presumption of innocence, the right to have a lawyer present, the right to defense, and to have the adequate time and facilities to prepare a defense. We have also some engagement related to the rights at the trial, during the trial process, like, for example, the right for the public accounts and also the public manager to be present at the trial, the right to defend oneself, the right to a public and reasoned judgment, and all the hearings are open to the public due to this engagement. It's applied in some countries but not respected in others. The right to appeal and to challenge the decision of the jurisdictional side, and it's by revision of this decision, or also the right to appeal or to cassation, the presumption of innocence. And we can find in this large engagement something which is not traditional or usual in the activity of the audit done by the SAI, but it's related more to the jurisdictional activity of the SAI. We have also engagement to communicate and to guarantee the access to information during and after the jurisdictional process. Let's begin with the first engagement with the citizens' information, because the judgments are pronounced on behalf of the people, and that's very important because the citizens must be informed of the jurisdictional side exercise, and the judgment should be accessible to all the citizens. Many of sides are publishing already on their websites the result of the judgments. Others are rather putting them just in the site, and if a lawyer or a citizen comes to the site, they can access to this information. We have here particular challenge for this citizens' information. It's related to the personal data, and the personal data is guaranteed, and it has been recognized as an exception in the AFROSAI P50, but also in the Bangalore Principle and the principles of United Nations to the citizens' access to the information about the judgment. We have here in the AFROSAI community many sites removing the name of the account and also the name of the public manager before publishing the final judgment. We have also an engagement to the public open access, or also to the access of the media to the results of the jurisdictional process. And the open access to the judgment results is more requiring for the AFROSAI community than the publicity of the audit report itself, because it's related to the nature of the jurisdictional activity, and also it's related to the effectiveness of the jurisdictional side and the effectiveness of the accountability ecosystem. It has also a preventive and proactive aspect on the work of the side, but also on the liability regime in the country. And it has been recognized by many sides by approving the principle of public judgment process. We have also here feedback coming from the Global Side Stock-Taking Report, the last one of the AFROSAI for the year 2023. And it's shown that 40% of judged accounts were published by the sides answering to the global survey. Indeed, an aspect seeming to affect the assessment of implementation of decisions and the relation was positive between the publication of the results of the jurisdictional process and the implementation of the decision itself. And the publication could be in form of an annual report about the jurisdictional activity, but also by the publication of the judgment itself after removing the personal data. And the recommendation of the global size stock-taking report was about the guarantee of transparency of jurisdictional activity to improve the impact of the SAI intervention. The last engagement in these jurisdictional activities about the enforcement of the decision of the SAI and the follow-up of the jurisdictional results of the activity. And it's related directly to the effectiveness of jurisdictional activity and it giving more impact and more importance to the work of the jurisdictional SAI in the accountability ecosystem. It begins with the decision notification because the jurisdictional SAI must notify with a reasonable time framework the decision to the concerned parties and to the authorities also in charge of its implementation. We know that the executive power is the authority in charge of the implementation of all the judgment, and it's the same for the judgments coming from the jurisdictional SAI, but also other parties are concerned by this decision, like mainly the accountant himself and also the entity or the public entity who is the hierarchy competence of this public manager. The follow-up of the jurisdictional result of the jurisdictional activity, because the SAI must follow up the execution of its decision and have the appropriate means to do it, and it's related to the independence of the SAI, but also to the effectiveness of the work of the SAI, not to have judgment without application in the real world. And finally, the decision enforcement. If the SAI have no legal mandate to enforce its decision, they have to coordinate with the relevant public authorities able to do so, and it's the main principle of the INTO-SAI P50, but also coming from this word of the United Nations Principle of Justice and the Bangalore Principles. A main result or feedback coming also here from the Global Size Stock-Taking Report of 2023. When it comes to follow-up of the jurisdictional decision, only 32% of the SAI answering to the global survey have developed a system that allows them to follow up the implementation of their decision. And a handful or a few of SAIs prepare and publish a follow-up report on the implementation of the decision. So the recommendation of the Global SAI Stock-Taking Report was about to put a system of following up of the jurisdictional result and also to publish this report about the implementation of the decisions. To conclude, I have three main remarks. The first one is that we recognize that part of the stakeholders of the jurisdictional SAI are indeed the traditional stakeholders of the SAI, but with different expectations for the jurisdiction, and we have to take in consideration these expectations during the process of engaging these stakeholders. The second remark is that to demonstrate ongoing relevance to citizens, parliament, and other stakeholders, the jurisdictional SAI has to respond appropriately to the challenge of citizens, the expectation of different stakeholders, and for emerging risk and changing environment in which the jurisdictional activity is conducted in the country. And the third and last one is to be seen as credible voice of beneficial change in the accountability ecosystem. The jurisdictional SAI has to undertake a meaningful dialogue with stakeholders about how the jurisdictional activity can improve the public sector. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha. That was a very insightful presentation, especially when it comes to jurisdictional size. For those of us who work with Westminster size, it's always very interesting to see the slight differences in the types of stakeholders you engage with and what kind of engagements you have with them as well. So much appreciated. We really appreciate your time here. And I hope everyone has a much better understanding now of the engagements in relation to jurisdictional size, and also as per the rest of the presentations, where we've come from and why we're looking at stakeholder engagement, and then, of course, how to conduct your stakeholder engagement. We have been keeping a close eye on the question and answer box, and we noticed that there have been no questions coming through for the panelists. So if anyone does have any questions, you can quickly type it, like I said earlier, preferably in English, into the question and answer box. I see something coming through. This is from Mumtaz Ismail saying, thank you for the presentations, very insightful. Kindly share the presentations after. Mumtaz, I'm pretty certain we will be able to send you presentations. I believe you're from Uganda, so welcome to Uganda as well. If anybody else has any other questions. I'll give you a minute. Unfortunately, we were unable to connect with Ms. Natalie Ngwema from Gabon, who was going to give the perspective from Krefiaf. We hope to be able to at least share her presentation with you. And if there are no more questions, I would like to move into the closing. If you still have questions, you may still type them into the question and answer box. Unfortunately, Mr. Hassan was also unable to join us. He is the executive director of the AFROSAI Secretariat. And what we want to have is at least a way forward from this webinar. And that would be, at the very least, for us all to develop stakeholder engagement strategies within our size, and then implement those strategies, which takes us into stakeholder management. It's only with implementation that we will actually find success. If there is a word of advice that we can give, it's do not be afraid to stumble within stakeholder engagement. There's always opportunity to grow, but you cannot find movement unless you're engaging. And unfortunately, we tend to feel like we do audit and we report on that, and that is where our mandate ends, and then came into AFROSAI with the pronouncements that we've got to go beyond, and we've got to make a difference in the lives of citizens. We've got to be engaging the citizens. We've got to be engaging all of our other stakeholders. So there is no shying away from the people element. And anytime you are dealing with people, you are communicating, which turns into engagement. So a way forward is develop your stakeholder engagement strategies. Start training your stakeholders as well. Do workshops on your role and mandate. Understand what they expect from you. So gather your stakeholder expectations, but also share your expectation of them. And then, as Sianda had said in his presentation as well, understanding your stakeholder and then being able to plot them so that you know how to engage with them. is very important. Engaging with them will help you understand where they fit in your entire strategy. But also in implementation, be very clear on your objectives for engaging with stakeholders. If you know what your intention is, then developing your key messages and also getting feedback, being able to monitor and track that engagement becomes easier because you started off with an objective. If your objective was achieved, it means your engagement was successful. And this is a continuous process. It does not happen once off. It does take time. But we've got to start strategically. Another point I would like to share is, especially when you're going to the level of civil society organizations and the citizens, even through the media, ensure that they know what your role and mandate is. Ensure that you consistently deliver the message of your role and your mandate and where your mandate ends. Very often, citizens would come back to say, you put out these reports and we don't see anything happening. So the expectation then is that we as the audit officers must change what is happening on the ground. And that is not our role. So if you are consistently delivering the message of where our mandate starts and where it ends, your citizens become familiar with that. And it makes it easier for you then to engage them and involve them in the audit process. There are a couple of more questions. From SAI Ethiopia, we have, how do we maintain our SAI independence through working with stakeholders? The other one is, how do you handle a situation where in a team, you are not arriving at a consensus on which stakeholder to prioritize, particularly between Parliament and the media? I will address both of those, and I think if our panelists, if you can at least address the independence one, I think the rest of them we will respond to in writing.
Yeah. Can I try to get some insights again?
Sure.
Yeah. And the issue of the independence was raised already in the AFROSAI P12, the value and benefits of SAI. And the principle of this AFROSAI P12 says that SAI should be aware of the expectation of stakeholders and respond to them in a timely manner and without compromising their independence. So this duty to provide the stakeholders with their expectations from the SAI would in no case compromise the independence of the SAI. And I think that it could be during the profiling of the stakeholders, we put the evaluation or the assessment of the risk on the independence of the SAI already, and also in giving them the floor through written, maybe a part of the procedure of the involvement of stakeholders could be written by a survey, for example, and also panels when no one of the stakeholders can influence the result of the process or also make the pressure more than the others because they are combined in the panel together, and also the way the SAI is collecting the expectation from the stakeholder is very relevant for the protection of the independence of the SAI. The risk is coming more from the executive, maybe, and the parliament also, because they are traditionally political powers. But if the SAI put already the moment of the involvement of the stakeholders and the way to get from them their expectations and to institutionalize maybe also the feedback from the SAI to these stakeholders, it will be something guaranteeing the independence of the SAI. But this issue was raised into SAI P12 and also into SAI P50, and that means that it's a real risk existing for the SAI when dealing with the expectations of the stakeholders that could be seen or could be also perceived as an influence on the work of the SAI or an input in the work of the SAI, and threatening like this the independence of the SAI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I hope that did answer that question, which I thought was very relevant. And we have noted all of the other questions. We will be responding in writing. There is one area that I think before I hand over to Mr. Bastawi for a closing comment, the need for SAI communication practitioners to gather and discuss their practices, their challenges, and create a group that is a support group as well within this region. That is something that we should be looking at. It would be really nice to have a working group of SAI practitioners dedicated to communication and stakeholder engagement. And I think, Mr. Bastawi, this would be something I would also hope that the AFROSAI OCBC takes a note of and can facilitate, so that the peers in the region who are on the ground doing the actual stakeholder engagement can get together and support each other through this this practice. So thank you for that, Zainat, for reminding us of a possibility of that. With that, it is 15:35, and I would like to take an extra 5 minutes to hand over to Mr. Mohammed Bastawi to give us some closing remarks. You're muted, Mr. Bastawi.
Sorry. Merci, Madame Zakia, pour cette excellente animation de cette journée. Et il faut dire, ça a été une journée très enrichissante pour nous tous. Nous avons partagé certaines expériences. Je remercie énormément les différents panélistes et différents intervenants, notre collègue de la Guinée-Conakry, notre collègue et ami de l'AGSA, de l'Auditeur général de l'Afrique du Sud, et notre collègue, bien sûr, Aïcha Ben Hassan de la Cour des comptes de Tunisie. On regrette l'absence de notre collègue de la Cour des comptes du Gabon, mais c'est des choses qui peuvent arriver. Bon, je retiens deux choses très importantes. L'importance de la mobilisation et de l'engagement des parties prenantes au sein des ISC aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, les ISC ne peuvent plus continuer à travailler sans toutefois faire de la mobilisation des parties prenantes une priorité stratégique. Ça, c'est de 1. 2, il y a un travail formidable qui a été fait par l'INTOSAI, surtout l'IDA. L'IDA, elle travaille sur le sujet depuis déjà quelques années. Elle a mis en place un guide qui est très détaillé sur la mobilisation. 3. Beaucoup de travaux ont été faits en la matière au niveau des ISC africaines. Or, malheureusement, la majorité des ISA africaines n'arrivent pas encore à faire de la mobilisation une priorité en leur sein. Et à ce niveau, je rejoins la recommandation de Zakia, qui est très pertinente, sur enfin, peut-être la recommandation de créer un sous-groupe qui va travailler sur cette question de mobilisation et d'engagement des parties prenantes au sein de la commission de renforcement des capacités organisationnelles. Et cette question, je pense qu'on doit y réfléchir très solidement et très en profondeur lors de la prochaine réunion en Libye le 2, qui est prévue le dimanche 2, pour pouvoir réfléchir sur la mise en œuvre de ce groupe, pour pouvoir vraiment prendre cette question dans les années à venir. C'est très important. Jusqu'à présent, on en parle, mais quelque chose qu'on maîtrise conceptuellement, mais dans la pratique, c'est quelque chose qui n'est pas encore mis en pratique chez nous, à différents niveaux, parce que nous n'avons pas le même contexte d'évolution, nous ne sommes pas au même niveau d'évolution institutionnelle, nous n'avons pas, c'est pas le même niveau, j'allais dire, de même évolution politique, etc. Il y a plusieurs facteurs qui entrent en jeu. Mais en tant que Cour des comptes, en tant qu'auditeur, en tant qu'auditeurs généraux, nous sommes tous, j'allais dire, des praticiens, nous parlons le même langage. On peut, en tant que technicien, aller de l'avant dans ce sujet et le développer dans les années à venir. Je vous remercie à vous tous. Un mot pour la difficulté de ne pas avoir Hassan, parce qu'il est actuellement en Libye, parce qu'il est en train de préparer l'Assemblée générale de la AFROSAI qui démarre dimanche. C'est la raison pour laquelle il n'a pas pu être parmi nous, n'a pas pu être joint. C'est ça la raison qui explique ça. Merci à vous tous et je donne la parole à Madame Zakia pour faire la closing définitive de cette réunion. Merci.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Mr. Bastawi. And yes, we will be waiting to hear from Libya if we've had progress on this matter. I have nothing more to add except to say thank you to each of our presenters. I would, they've done an excellent job in sharing and helping us understand what their experience of stakeholder engagement in their particular size are. I also would love to thank all of the interpreters who have done an excellent job in keeping you up to date with this entire afternoon's proceedings. They are amazing people, and we give them kudos to that. So well done. And especially to SAI South Africa and the team there. Avisha, whom you've all been hearing from, has done an excellent job in sorting out all of the administration, and then to our service provider, On-Site Insight, for hosting this webinar on their platform and enabling this to go so smoothly. And thank you to each one of you who have stayed through the presentation. And I hope you gained what you needed from here. We will be sharing as much as possible from this afternoon with you, presentations, the videos, and the answers to the questions as well. So have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for your time. And we will see you hopefully again soon.